Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Friday, the 6th of September in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, today's US jobs data could set the tone for rate cuts as the Federal Reserve's Austin Goolsbee warns of rising unemployment.
France's new Prime Minister, Michel Barnier, makes overtures to Le Pen's national rally.
Plus, exclusive reporting from Bloomberg that the UK Labour Party's top fundraiser has been advising on appointees for public posts. We have the details.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Traders are preparing for US jobs data that may determine the size of a Fed rate cut this month. Forecasters expect the August report to show a bounce in hiring and a tick lower in the unemployment rate after July's softer data spooked markets. The median estimate in a Bloomberg survey of economists shows payrolls probably rose by 165,000 last month, following July's increase of 114,000. Unemployment is predicted to have edged down to 4.2%. That report out at 1:30pm London time. We'll have live coverage across the terminal and on Bloomberg Radio.
Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee says that he has seen mounting warning signs from the labour market, but more favourable inflation readings. Speaking to Dow Jones Market Watch, Goolsbee said it's pretty clear that the path is not just rate cuts soon, but multiple cuts over the next 12 months. That sentiment was echoed by billionaire investor John Paulson, who told Bloomberg's Sonali Basak that the Fed waited too long to ease, and he now expects significant rate reductions over the coming year.
Inflation now is somewhere around 3%. Interest rates are 5%. So real interest rates are too high. So the Fed, I think, waited too long to bring interest rates down. So I think the likely course of action is going forward is the Fed will start to cut interest rates.
What should they be by the end of 2025?
It's difficult to predict, but my best guesstimate would be around 3%, perhaps 2.5%.
Well, you can hear the full interview with John Paulson, who's talked about as a potential Treasury Secretary if Donald Trump wins the presidency, on the Bloomberg Talks podcasts. All your key conversations in one place.
Donald Trump says he would cut the corporate tax rate and slash regulations as he pitched his economic agenda to Wall Street and corporate leaders at the Economic Club of New York.
To further support the revival of American manufacturing, my plan calls for expanded R&D tax credits, 100% bonus depreciation, expensing for new manufacturing investments, and a reduction in the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15% solely for companies that make their product in America.
Trump's proposal is a stark contrast to Kamala Harris's vision for corporate taxes. The Democratic presidential nominee has called to increase the corporate rate to 28%. Trump also vowed to establish a task force to review federal expenditure headed by Elon Musk. The Tesla and SpaceX CEO has endorsed the Republican nominee and previously pitched the idea to the former president.
Well, the European Central Bank will continue to cut interest rates every quarter, despite a weaker economy. That, according to a poll of analysts who don't think that the central bank will speed up reductions in order to bolster growth. Respondents expect the European deposit rate to be lowered from 3.75% to 3.5% at next week's ECB meeting, following the initial cut that we saw in June, and for the ECB to cut steadily to 2.5% by next September.
France's new Prime Minister has made a plea to the country's political factions to work together as he seeks to build support in Parliament. Michel Barnier has promised to focus on issues including security and reducing migration, seen as a nod to the priorities of the far right. The former EU Brexit negotiator also said France must confront the difficult truths about its public finances.
We will act more than talk. We'll try to find solutions coming from everywhere. The government will not pretend to have a superior knowledge. I have learned in my long public life that good ideas come from everywhere, often from the bottom, the most humble of people, when you take the time to listen to them.
That's French Prime Minister Michel Barnier speaking through a translator. He'll now have to construct a cabinet which can unite the left, right and centrist blocs in Parliament, none of which have a majority. His next task will be to finalise a budget before the start of next month.
Here in the UK, a top Labour fundraiser who has advised the party on appointments for public posts. That's according to people familiar with the matter who say that staff have raised concerns about the situation. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
Wahid Ali is a Labour lord, donor and TV mogul, but it's the role he's reportedly playing in public appointments that's worrying insiders. Sources say Ali, previously the party's chair of general election fundraising, has been working with senior officials to source candidates in a project he's dubbed Operation Integrity. One person says members made their unease about the same individual soliciting donations and advising on appointments known to senior figures to no avail. However, a Downing Street official said Ali played no part in public appointments or cabinet formation and denied knowledge of any complaints made against him. The news comes after Prime Minister Keir Starmer promised a total crackdown on cronyism if his party got back into government at the beginning of 2024. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Hong Kong is keeping its stock market closed today as a typhoon nears the region. Trading on the country's $4.9 trillion exchange was cancelled after the city's Weather Bureau extended a Typhoon Signal 8 warning until early afternoon. But this is likely to be the last time a weather event stops trading in Hong Kong, as the city elected last year to end its decades-long practice of shutting markets during severe storms. It comes as Hong Kong battles to improve the appeal of its flagging stock market, with the benchmark Hang Seng Index down more than 5% over the past 12 months, underperforming global peers. In a moment, more on the pivotal jobs report expected today out of the US, plus details about what the French Prime Minister is going to be facing in his new job. But another story that caught our eye this morning from our Bloomberg opinion columnist, FD Flam, looking at the question of emails and whether or not you should respond to them when you've come back to that avalanche of emails from holidays.
Yeah, I always have too many. But it's so interesting what FD writes about, that humans, like monkeys, put hierarchy at the heart of much of what we do, and that email is governed by the rules of dominance hierarchy. Basically, this is kind of the central idea that social primates are wired to sort of play these games. On email, she writes, the sender wants something from the recipient, but it is the status of the recipient relative to the sender that dictates whether or not and for how long the request can be ignored. And it also, of course, takes much more effort to manage the emails from people who might be higher than you in the hierarchy.
You must be very careful about how you phrase them, whereas the argument is that you can just sort of fire off any old response if you perceive someone as being lower in the pecking order than you.
But the difficulty is when you don't know what the status of the other person might be.
Which is why I always write you such lovely emails, Caroline.
Really? I thought the status relationship would be quite clear. Anyway, less of that. You can read all about it. It's a really great piece if you're struggling to manage your email. But yeah, our columnist advises humour to deflect the tension with any emails.
I'm sure I'd never do that, Caroline. Right, let's turn back to one of our top stories this morning. Of course, we're looking ahead to the crucial payrolls data today in the US, but also thinking about what Donald Trump told the Economic Club of New York about his plans for corporate taxes. Bloomberg anchor Kriti Gupta has been across all of these stories for us, and she's with us in studio now. Let's start with the payrolls data, of course, the big event for markets today. Kriti, what's the expectation? Is it really going to be the big decider when it comes to whether or not the Fed's going to cut by 50 basis points?
It is going to be the big decider, and the expectation is that there's going to be a miss in the payrolls numbers. And this is significant because if you look at the data deluge in the jobs kind of sector this week, you've seen a miss on the ADP payrolls, or ADP number, which really shows the private new hires that you're going to see. You saw fewer than expected job openings in the JOLTS data as well. All indications thus far are pointing to a miss on the payrolls. You're also seeing fewer expected initial jobless claims. So this is kind of pointing to the deceleration in the jobs market in various parts of the economy, whether it comes to job openings, the private sector, and now, of course, non-farm payrolls as well. That being said, this is a data set that tends to surprise. So if you look at the market reaction off of the back of it, the 1% it's about a 1% move in either direction for the S&P 500 in the 8 hours after the data. So basically in the trading session after, we can quantify it. It goes anywhere from 0.8% to as high as 1% in terms of this particular data set. So that's kind of what we're looking at. But the expectation here is that Chair Powell has already boxed himself into a little bit of a corner. That 25 is what's on the cards for September. The issue is that you're already seeing so much weakness this week when it comes to the Beige Book, when you're seeing the ISM data as well, arguably the services as well, that there's a question now of whether Chair Powell needs to be considering 50. And when I say Chair Powell, of course, mean the entire FOMC. But this is why payrolls matters, because if it's a severe miss off of the back of the August panic as well, that would indicate some sort of acceleration towards recession.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be all the more interesting to hear from the two very key Fed speakers, Williams and Waller. The report is out at 1:30 p.m. London time. So that for the August payrolls data. Let's also talk about Donald Trump. 15% corporate tax rate pledge. That should get the attention of US corporations if they produce in the US.
Yes, this is a fascinating one because it's coming right off of the heels of his rival Kamala Harris talking about the tax rates there as well. Look, one of the major wins for the Trump administration, his first term, was his tax plan. The tax cuts put more money in people's wallets, whether you are a billionaire on Wall Street or whether you are a average middle class worker in another part of the states. It also helped a lot of corporations and incentivized them to repatriate a lot of cash. This was something he had campaigned upon the first time around. It pulled money from Asia, pulled money from Europe, and brought it back into the States from a corporate perspective, which had been a sticking point, especially in the tech sector in the United States. So he's really leaning into that success story and saying, look, even that 21% was a drop from the previous amount, which I want to say was something like 24 or 25%. And now he's talking about bringing it further to 15. By comparison, Kamala Harris is vouching for 28%. Joe Biden has been pushing for much higher as well. So this is where he's trying to kind of win votes, but he's also making the argument here that if you have Trump tax cuts or an extension of that, which was imposed in 2017 and expires in 2025, there is a concern around the deficit. And he's already gone ahead and said, well, actually, I can solve that too. And I can do it through tariffs and I can do it through controlling immigration. So you have less in terms of a per capita approach as well. So his kind of budget thinking is a little bit different, that yes, we can fund these tax cuts despite having a deficit. And we do it by basically penalizing, for lack of a better term, trade with the rest of the world and penalizing companies that rely on and invest on the rest of the world.
Okay, Kriti Gupta, thank you very much for joining us. Now, 60 days after elections in France, the country has a new Prime Minister. Michel Barnier has pledged to focus on issues of importance to the far right, including security and migration. The 73-year-old former EU Brexit negotiator was tapped by Emmanuel Macron to be Premier. We spoke to Barnier on Bloomberg Radio last year and asked him about his future.
What's next? It's not necessary to recall my age. So
I was very careful to...
yes, but I know my age, so I'm very realistic. So I just want to be useful by taking part to the debate in my country.
So that was Michel Barnier speaking to us in June of last year. Let's bring in Bloomberg senior editor based in Paris, Phil Serafino. Good morning to you, Phil. So Barnier, they're making a joke about his own age, not at my prompting, I should point out. France's oldest prime minister in the modern political era, taking over from the youngest. What kind of prime minister will he make? What does he stand for?
Well, he's a center-right politician with a long history in government and politics, as he alluded to there. And presumably Macron sees him as a safe pair of hands, a calming influence who can bring people together. There was some reporting that Macron sees him as the least divisive option in a time when French politics is very divided. He's not likely to win over anyone on the left, but he's the kind of person who can work with Macron's centrist party, Barnier's own center-right party, the Republicans, and the far right. So Macron is betting that will allow him to do what needs to be done to get France moving in the right direction.
And he does have a lot to do, to form a cabinet, to speak to Parliament. There's the 2025 budget. What will his priorities be?
The budget is absolutely the number one situation that he has to deal with. First he does have to appoint a cabinet, and that presumably is going to happen imminently. He doesn't have time to wait. The budget process has to be sort of wrapped up in early October. The EU has begun an excessive deficit procedure against France, so France really needs to show that it's getting its budget situation under control, and that is going to be just a real battle, because on the the leftist coalition, which won the most seats in Parliament, they want a big increase in spending, and Macron's view has been that that's just not possible. There has to be big budget cuts. So that's going to be absolutely the number one priority.
Phil, in the parliamentary maths is difficult, though, for Michel Barnier. No group has a majority in Parliament. How is he going to be able to get laws passed? Who is he going to need to support him?
One thing he'll need is the far right. And, it's sort of Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party has sort of been toxic, even though they are the third largest party in Parliament. But it's gotten to the point now where if you want to get legislation passed, there's going to need to be an understanding with them. Barnier is going to have to seek their support. And you noticed when he made his initial comments yesterday, he talked about issues that are important to Le Pen, such as immigration. So he's sort of reaching out to them. Between the centrists that Macron represents, Barnier's own center-right party, and the far right, presumably there would be enough votes, but there are a lot of egos at play and a lot of conflicting views. So that's really the left seems to be, they're going to oppose almost anything he does on the budget. So that's going to have to be the coalition he builds with the far right.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.